Warning. Saga is a mature reader's title produced by Image Comics, and while there will be no scenes of nudity in this review, there will still be graphic depictions of violence, some sexual innuendo and foul language, and some depictions of underage sex trafficking. Viewer discretion is advised.
Previously on Saga.
The long-standing war between the winged fairy-like people of the Landfall Empire and the horned magic practitioners of the Moon of Wreath had taken a decidedly sexy turn as Marco of the Wreath and Alana of the Landfall had fallen in love. It took only one night of passion for Alana to realize she was pregnant for she and Marco to run off and elope. Unfortunately, the birth of the couple's daughter Hazel is not seen as the uniting event that one would think, and now both sides are after them.
Both the Wreath and Landfall have employed bounty hunters to track down the young family. The Wreath have enlisted the romantic duo of the Will and the Stalk, the latter a topless Spider-Woman who wound up being killed in a confrontation with the family and a ghost named Isabel. This has led the Will to begin a much slower pursuit, picking up a lie-detecting cat and seeking to free an escaped underage sex slave along the way.
Landfall, meanwhile, has turned to royalty for their fugitive pursuit by hiring Prince Robot IV of the Robot Kingdom. Sadly, this has wound up throwing a bit of a wrench into his sex life, though his wife does inform her of her pregnancy just before he leaves. That being said, the bounty hunters aren't the primary concern for the family and Isabel, who's become something of a nanny to Hazel. As they fly through the cosmos in an organically grown ship, it wind up getting attacked by two individuals who teleport onto the ship and then open a portal throwing Isabel inside of it. It turns out that these two individuals are none other than Marco's parents.
So, how much sex lays ahead in this story? I mean, outside of an infamous panel that got Comixology kicked off the Apple App Store that I can't show you. Well, let's find out. This is Saga, Volume 2.
Marco tries to play things off as no big deal while his mother Kiara screams at them at their native tongue, and you know she only knows the swear words. When Alana lashes out over Isabel's apparent death, Kiara explains that the ghost was merely teleported to a nearby planet. So, Marco is forced to turn to his father, Bar, in order to borrow his equipment to teleport to said world, with Kiara in hot pursuit. This, of course, leaves Bar behind with his towel-clad new daughter-in-law. Bar makes a minor attempt at small talk by questioning if Hazel is normal, which naturally upsets Alana, who telepathically manipulates the ship in order to tie him up. Down on the planet below, Kiara continues ripping Marco a new one before the two get jumped by a giant naked giant.
Yeah, you're not going to see much of the giant, given that he's like 1/4 scrotum.
Back on the ship, Bar uses an incantation to free himself and is explaining that he really needed to talk with both Alana and Marco because he has terminal cancer.
Cancer?
Bar has a little over a month left to live, and he just wanted to see his granddaughter and try to settle things with Marco before it happened. However, Alana begins freaking out over the stress, so Bar has no other choice but to sedate her. While Alana sleeps, Bar makes a special arrangement with the ship to perform a special project. When Alana awakens, she finds a new set of clothes for both her and Hazel, as it turns out Bar is a part-time tailor. On the planet, Marco and Kiara subdue the giant and use the family translator rings to discern where Isabel traveled to. However, they have to hurry as it turns out this planet is in actuality a giant egg that is ready to hatch.
Oh no. They're in that terrible anti-abortion episode of Doctor Who. Well, anyway, let's move on to the Will, who's currently trying to free that underage sex girl I mentioned earlier. And yeah, the character is literally just named Slave Girl.
The Will collaborates with the Stalk in order to set the slave girl free, who immediately turns into a vampire and bites the Will on the neck. Yes, this turned out to all be a dream, as the bounty hunter is rousted out of bed by a very angry employer from the Wreath. The Will came very highly recommended, and so far, he's just not living up to the hype. The woman wants to make sure she gets both Marco and his translator jewelry, which were part of a dowry for their marriage.
This is Marco's ex-fiancée, Gwendolyn, who really did give him those rings that act as universal translators. Those rings actually work in tandem with a pendant that Gwendolyn wears. And Marco then turned around and used those rings as the wedding rings for him and Alana, so yeah, she might be a little bit justified here.
Gwendolyn is now going to be along for the ride in order to ensure that this task actually gets completed. However, the will not do anything until the slave girl is rescued. So Gwendolyn pretends to be a buyer to set up a deal with the girl's broker. From there, the two, along with Lion Cat, take out the naked mole rat goons and get the slave girl onto their ship. This proves to be quite fortuitous, as it turns out the slave girl can actually sense the messaging between Gwendolyn's pendant and the translation rings she gave to Marco, and she's able to track them to their very location. Meanwhile, Marco and Chiara look desperately for Isabel when they happen across a quartet of midwives who may or may not be part of a death cult. Before any violence can occur, Isabel pops out in the form of a flaming gorilla to scare the attackers off. Isabel isn't too keen about having to deal with Chiara, but the impending hatching of the egg puts a kibosh on any hostilities. They get back to the ship just shortly after Bar has to explain to Alana that the piece of Hazel's body that fell off while taking a bath is just the remains of her umbilical cord, meaning her daughter now has an innie. However, there are more pressing matters at hand, as it turns out debris from the now hatched egg is hammering the ship. Added to that, the Will and his companions have also arrived. The Will identifies the newly hatched planet baby as a time suck, a large cosmic predator capable of swallowing entire fleets in a matter of seconds. Gwendolyn attempts to launch a heat-seeking missile at the creature, only for it to wind up being directed towards Marco and Alana's ship instead.
Would a heat-seeking missile work in the vacuum of space?
A quick-thinking Alana hits on the idea that the missile will not explode if it's not a proper distance away from the launching point, so she turns the ship into it and rams it full on, directing it back into the time suck. This, in turn, causes the creature to begin attacking the Will's ship, ripping a hole in the hull and sucking Lion Cat out into space.
No!
Thankfully, the Will is able to eject himself off the ship and rescue Lion Cat before it can die, and thus return to the ship before retreating for repairs. Back with Marco and Alana's family, their ship has hit a different snag as it turns out the fuel injectors have been malfunctioning, and in order to save everyone, Marco is forced to dump his family's teleportation armor into the engine to give it enough of a boost to escape the time suck. However, this begins having a negative effect on the structural integrity of the ship, and Bar is forced to use his binding magic to keep things in place long enough to get to a safe distance. Unfortunately, in the process, this winds up giving him a severe heart attack, and Bar soon dies, just as Marco and Alana return from the engine room. As this plays out, Prince Robot IV is busy looking. Not for his bounty, but rather for Dr. Oswald Heist, an author who wrote a book that wound up setting Marco and Alana off on this path that they are now on. As he approaches Heist's homeworld, Prince Robot IV flips through the melodious tome.
Blood. 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 And bits of...
Though Dr. Oswald Heist is a noted political revolutionary author, in this case the book in question is just a cheap dime store romance novel about star-crossed lovers that he wrote to just pay the bills. It was this book that Alana had just read when she first encountered Marco, and it sort of opened her eyes to the idea of true love. So yeah, as the two bonded and the connection slowly grew between them, that book grew to be a bigger influence.
The prince tracks down Heist to his home and confronts the author, who's somewhat taken aback as, again, he only wrote that book to help pay off some debts incurred by the end of his marriage. A marriage that ended shortly after his son took his own life after serving for the Landfall Army. Dr. Heist then pulls out a weapon, however, before he can shoot Prince Robot IV, the prince manages to morph his arm into a blaster and shoots Heist in the knee. The prince knows the truth about Heist in all of his works.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
To that end, Prince Robot IV isn't actually going to kill Dr. Heist. Rather, he's just going to sit around and wait, as eventually he knows Marco, Alana, and their family are going to show up. The funny thing is, the prince might not have to wait that long.
This does technically end the second volume of Saga. There's a little bit added onto it, but it's just a preview of another series by Brian K. Vaughan called Paper Girls. You may remember the adaptation of which showed up on Amazon Prime earlier this year. But with that in mind, how is Saga Volume 2? Well, it's pretty good. It's a nice continuation from Saga Volume 1, obviously, and the artwork is still really top-notch and very fun throughout all of it. I think there's some really brisk pacing to this. I mean, 6 issues went by in a breeze. It just went by so quickly. It's like, I barely even realized I had read 3 issues when I read 3 issues. So, yeah, it's very briskly paced. And overall, there's some really good characterization throughout all of this. Everyone, you understand what everyone's role is, and everyone makes sense in what they believe. So, again, nothing too far from the ordinary there. If I do have a complaint, I am aware that this is a mature reader's book, and so obviously certain limits on things are not there anymore, but it kind of falls into the category of just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. Or to put it simply, did we really need to see the giant nutsack on that one creature? Also, I would say Prince Robot the Fourth is kind of underutilized. Like, he's clearly built to be this big threat, and he was actually one of the more interesting characters in Volume 1, but like I said, he's barely in Volume 2, save for this little bit at the end, which even then is still one of the more interesting aspects of the book. So you can see where I say he is underutilized. So with that being said, like I said, this is really fun. Obviously I would suggest reading Volume 1 before jumping onto Volume 2, but still, I'm going to give Saga Volume 2 an A. So with that in mind, let's see what we're doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Hey guys, remember you can help support the channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcat productions. There you can request a tray to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. And as always, remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.